Good day, everyone. We are the Group 6A and we will be your storyteller for today. We are going to share to you about Romantic period, including its historical background and characteristics. We also have the characteristics of English literature during this period and some literary forms and famous works of different authors. Specifically, I Wandered as a Cloud by William Wordsworth. Romanticism is a term applied to the literary and artistic movement that took place between 1785 and 1832 in Western Europe. This was a revolt against aristocratic, social, and political norms of Age of Enlightenment, and a reaction against the scientific rationalization of nature. It was embodied most strongly in the visual arts, music, and literature, but it also had a major impact on the historiography, education, and natural history. There are also some events that happened during this period. The first one is the Industrial Revolution. In terms of economic growth and technological advances, England was the first country to become industrialized. Machines were changing the agricultural economy of the past that relied on manual labor to this new industrial economy. The growing population and consequently the growing literacy rate would also prove to create a huge change in communication as well as politics, technology, religion, and society in general. The next one is the French Revolution. This revolution brought violent end to the feudal powers and monarchy and asserted the right and supremacy of the individual free will. This revolution has three principles: liberty, equality, and fraternity. This was also a revolt against oppression and exploitation. This revolution not only changed the political and social systems, but it also has a huge impact on the literary world. The Napoleonic Wars were another big event at that time. Those were the wars led by Napoleon Bonaparte against Europe from the end of 18th century until the year of 1815. Many of most prolific writers were influenced significantly by the crusade against Napoleon. The wars ended in 1815 when Napoleon lost the Battle of Waterloo. After the victory over France, England became one of the strongest, richest, and most powerful countries in the world. And now we have the characteristic of Romantic period. The movement validated strong emotion as an authentic source of aesthetic experience. For example, the strong feelings that wartime produces serve as a catalyst for an outpouring of art and literature. It also legitimized the individual imagination as a critical authority which permitted freedom from classical notions of form in art. Next, Romanticism has been used to refer to certain artists, poets, writers, musicians, as well as political, philosophical, and social thinkers. It has equally been used to refer to various artistic, intellectual, and social trends of that era. Gender roles and sensibilities were also clearly defined in this period. Society was organized along patriarchal lines, with the woman confined to the domestic sphere so that men could play an active role in the public sphere. The women were at home without a way to express their feelings, fight for the cause, or even connect to those around them. And now let's go to the next page, which is the characteristics of English literature during this period.
All right, so now we are going to be reading about the characteristics of the Romantic period at that time. So, with the first one, is the glorification of nature. That was one of the characteristics in the Romantic period. So, when we say glorification of nature, we are actually talking about how the romantics at that time wanted to restore the man's relationship with nature. Okay, so they saw nature as something as pure, almost uncorrupted, and therefore they saw nature as almost something spiritual to them at that time. So, most of the romantics believed that humans were born pure and good, but the society at that time was corrupted. So, nature therefore became a symbol of life, and without society, it was a truly good life. Okay, so therefore, nature emerged as a powerful symbol in the Romantic period. So at that time, writers began to give personal, deep descriptions of nature and its wild and powerful qualities. So then again, one of the characteristics in the Romantic period is glorification of nature. So moving on to the next one is the celebration of isolation and melancholy. So when we talk about that, it's almost as if they were celebrating something in the like sad side of emotions, because melancholy is where it's a type of emotion that it's almost similar to being sad. So at that time, romantic melancholy seemed to stem in part of the attempt to find some correspondence or some connection between reality and the kind of an idealized life that the romantics seeked at that time. So, as I said earlier, that the Romantics saw society as corrupted. They were unable or unwilling to adjust themselves to the society's norms. So they expressed their feelings in frustration, in melancholy. So that's why we consider one characteristic of the Romantic period to be a celebration of isolation and melancholy. It was their way of expressing their frustration towards society, towards the corruption of society as they saw it at that time. So, with that said, um, they also celebrated the of creativity and imagination. So, because the Romantics at that time, um, I had an ideal view of what life should be without the corruption of society. They actually started to believe and they started to look at the world very differently. So, as it says here, that they celebrated that the vision in their work. So one way to show what their perspective of what a good world is they celebrated it through arts. So you could see at that time that the Romantic period had very famous arts, and also they celebrated it through imagination. So artists and writers looked at the world differently at that time. So again, as mentioned, as we read more about the Romantic period, I want you to keep in mind the three characteristics that I have just mentioned. So the first one is glorification of nature. The second one is celebration of isolation and melancholy. And then the third one is celebration of artistic creativity and imagination. Thank you so much for listening. And as we continue with our story, I hope you guys stay in tune for more.
Another characteristic of literature in the Romantic period is number 4, the use of personification. So personification is a figure of speech in which a thing, an idea, or an animal is given human attributes. So the non-human objects are portrayed in such a way that we feel they have the ability to act like human beings. For example, when we say the sky weeps, So we are giving the sky the ability to cry, which is a human quality. Thus, we can say that the sky has been personified in the given sentence. Romantic poets and prose writers also use personifications in their work. So you can see examples of personifications of everything from the birds and animals to natural events or aspects. So these works even personify their feelings like loved or states like that. So Karl von Martier's writing is an amazing example of romantic literature. And he was called the father of ecology because of his philosophy and his work as a natural scientist. Number 5 characteristic of literature in Romantic period is focus on the self and autobiography. Romanticism focused on emotions and the inner life of the writer, and often they use autobiographical material to inform the work or even provide a template for it, unlike the traditional literature at that time. So you will see the autobiographical influences in poems and prose of this period. And one characteristic of this movement was the importance placed on feelings and creativity, and the source of much of their emotional and artistic work was the background and the real life surroundings of the writer. And this is a self-focused proceeded confessional poetry in the mid-1900s, but you can see its profound influence on that movement. So one key example of romantic autobiography is Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Confessions. So in this work, he endeavored to create a direct look at his own upbringing and life. Last characteristic of literature in the Romantic period is number 6, the idealization of women. So during the Romantic period of British literature, society began to debating the proper role of women. Not only were male poets and writers writing about their views of women's changing role, women were increasingly prolific writers writing about their own thoughts and experiences on the topic using a language that was easy to understand, and these women used their experiences to, in many cases, advocate for more egalitarian treatment from both men as individuals as well as a society at large. So this is especially notable as before this time period. So few women were afforded the opportunity to be educated in what were traditionally considered more masculine pursuits. So subjects generally considered appropriate for women included lessons in music, dancing, art, and needlework. So this role of women in society was fiercely debated by writers of this period.
Next, we head on to the dominant poetic forms during this period. First is an ode. It is written to praise a particular person, event, object, or an idea. Romantic poet John Keats was noted for introducing meditative odes which emphasizes the speaker's feelings and thoughts about a subject. In Keats' Ode to a Nightingale, the speaker chose the Song of a Nightingale as the basis of his meditation. The nightingale represents immortality in the poem. The speaker notes how the bird will live forever through its song, and the speaker wishes to gain that immortality. Another famous ode is Percy Shelley's Ode to the West Wind, in which the speaker describes the wind as a powerful and destructive force. Destructive as it takes away the summer and brings the cold winter, a season usually associated with death and sorrow. But despite this, the speaker still celebrates it. He said that without death, there is no rebirth. Second poetic form is elegy. It is written to mourn a person's death. A famous example of this is Thomas Gray's elegy written in a churchyard, which laments the death of ordinary people such as farmers. Lastly, we have lyric poem. It is a short, emotionally expressive poem with a song-like quality that is narrated in the first person. A famous example of this is William Wordsworth's The World is Too Much with Us, which expresses personal outrage against the effects of industrial revolution. Now we have here some of the famous works during this period. First is the lyrical ballads by Coleridge and Wordsworth in 1798, which is said to launch the English literature Romantic period. It consists a total of 23 poems that change the conventions of poetry to more of expressing nature, emotions, imagination, and language used by common men. Coleridge contributed only 4 poems and lyrical ballads, including the famous Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which tells the misfortunes of a sailor after shooting an albatross. Known for its dramatic storytelling and the line, "Water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink." This means that despite being surrounded by something, you can't benefit from it. Next literary piece is William Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience, showing 2 contrary sides of the human soul. It consists of 45 poems engraved with Blake's artworks because Blake is also a painter and he started producing illuminated books. First part deals with the innocence of childhood, love, and closer relationship to God, while the second part is much darker because it talks about sins of adults. Here are other famous works. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which is considered to be the mother of science fiction. It's about a monster created by a scientist named Victor Frankenstein. Then there's Don Juan by Lord Byron, which is about Juan's scandalous affairs with married women. This poem was credited for the saying, "Truth is stranger than fiction," which means facts can be harder to believe than fiction.
So let's take a look at with these 3 trivias under Romantic period. Number 1. Romanticism is not the same as romance. Although Romanticism sounds similar to romance, don't confine the vast spectrum of Romanticism to the ideas of romantic love and other soppy worldly affairs. It is true that tales of undying love, the promise of romance, and the complexity of human relationship are found in the Romanticism art movement. But Romanticism in itself covers much broader ground and a much broader range of topics, including basic human rights like liberty and freedom. Number 2. Romanticism gave rise to the importance of plein air painting. Plein air painting, also known as painting outdoors. It became a popular method of painting during the Romanticism movement. As the artists tried to break down the change of materialism, they saw plein air as a form of getting away from the predetermined realistic and material surroundings of the client's parlor. For example, many Romantic era painting like Rain Harvest in 1835 by Carol Lee portray some somber outdoor settings of those times and are a fresh look at life beyond the walls of the art patron estate. Last trivia under Romantic period, number 3 is animals were also a focal point. Animals, much like natural disasters, were also a common themes in their paintings, but their depiction didn't depend on lifelike accuracy. Instead, the traits of the animal were highlighted rather than their specific appearance. And that is the three trivia under Romantic period.
I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud is one of the famous and best-loved poems written in English language. It was composed by William Wordsworth around 1804. This poem is based on one of Wordsworth's own walk in the countryside of England's Lake District. I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud is a romantic poem bringing together key ideas about imagination, humanity, and the natural world. This poem explores the relationship between nature and humanity, that it argues that humanity is not separate from nature but rather part of it. And it also suggests that the natural world and a strong bond with it is essential to human happiness. And this happiness is drawn from the interaction of nature or is drawn in the interaction with nature. To understand more about this poem, I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud by William Wordsworth, let us take a look at each stanza. By the way, this poem has 4 stanzas with 6 lines each. So now, let's start in the first stanza. So in the first stanza, the poet or William Wordsworth is referring himself as a cloud in a metaphorical sense. He clearly mentions his passing through valleys and hills on a routine walk when he comes across a bunch of daffodils fluttering in the air. He was amazed by the beauty of those daffodils, in which those daffodils are the source of immense beauty for the poet hailing from the Romantic era. The poet also shows the daffodils are firmly perched beside the lake and beneath some trees. And he refers also to the daffodils dancing, which shows a trait relatable to humans. And in the second stanza, there is a direct referral to our galaxy Milky Way. The space continuum holds great mystery for a Romantic era poet as he envisions the daffodils to be in a constant state of wonder as the stars beyond the reach of humans. The poet makes an allusion to the Milky Way, filled with its own planetary solar system with stretch beyond infinity. The lake supposedly has a large area since the daffodils are dispersed along the shoreline. Along the Milky Way's premises lies countless stars, which the poet alludes to daffodils fluttering beside the lake. In this stanza also, the poet used 10,000s, which he meant a collection of daffodils were fluttering in the air, and used the term sprightly, which is primarily little spirits people deemed existed in such times. And in stanza 3, the waves of the sea also dance besides the daffodils, putting different aspects of nature in communion with each other. And for the last stanza, the poet is now marveled about what he saw, thus he fully appreciates the cheerful side of the dancing daffodils. As we can see, William Wordsworth shows the different characteristics of Romantic period in his poem, I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. He uses simile, hyperboles, personification, and allusion. He also uses nature in his poem, which shows the glorification of nature and shows the powerful symbol of nature during the Romantic period. In other words, the poem I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud by William Wordsworth tells us that we must learn to appreciate the beauty of nature, or the nature itself, for we are part of it and it gives us happiness and comfort. We people sometimes fail to appreciate the nature's wonders as we go through in our daily routines. But once we take time to appreciate the nature's beauty, then we will find peace, comfort, and happiness through it.